All right, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Julie Watkins, and I'll be hosting today's Travelogue brought to you by the Geographic Society of Chicago. Since 1898, the Geographic Society of Chicago has educated the public about geography and its important uses. Today's GSC trains students in the latest geospatial technology. Through services such as our community mapping projects, we offer unique educational experiences that harness the power of maps and the integrative tools of GIS, or Geographic Information Systems, to solve environmental and community issues. Together, our board and membership provide education opportunities for students and educators, assist in building geographic materials collections in educational and cultural institutions, promote new and emerging technologies and problem solving, and much more. If you're familiar with our Travelogue series, you know that in years prior to the pandemic, we would conduct our Travelogues in person each month at the Chicago Cultural Center. The GSC wanted to remain connected with its members and supporters, so we turned our Travelogue series into webinars. This is our, actually we're rounding out a year doing our virtual Travelogues, but we are still very interested in receiving any feedback that you may have for us. With us to present today is June Scott, who was actually the first presenter to kick off our virtual Travelogues last year when she spoke about her trip to Antarctica. But today she'll be taking us on an epic Trans-Siberian Railway journey that will carry us across the changing landscapes of China, Mongolia, Siberia, and Western Russia. We'll visit places from the Great Wall, the Gobi Desert, all the way back to the taiga forest. So we have a lot of traveling to do. So we just need to buckle up. We've got a long ride in for us, but it's going to be a lot of fun because June is super knowledgeable.
Welcome, everybody. It's so nice to be back. As Julie said, I started this about a year ago when we went to the Antarctic. And today I am going to take you on a different journey. It's going to be a journey that is going to take us across 2 continents, 12 regions, 87 cities, and 10 time zones. We kept changing our time. And it's the Pride of Russia. It was built in 1891, and it covers more than almost 7,000 miles. As I say, I went in August of 2011 with a Rhodes Scholar, and so let's get started. Yes, it's a long trip. It's more than 18 hours of flying. And as I said, I went with Rhodes Scholar, and I went with a friend from college. And we will be visiting China with its Great Wall, its Tai Chi in the parks, Mongolia with its gurs, Siberia with its windswept tundra and vast openness, and also Russia with its history and its glitter. And as I say, I can recommend it as a very, very interesting trip. Now, I want to show you the distance we will be traveling. We started in Shanghai. We will go to Xi'an, the capital of Beijing, and then we'll go into Mongolia and the open steppes in the lowlands sorry about that. And then we'll visit the beautiful Lake Baikal and Edinburgh, all the way to Moscow, and finally up to St. Petersburg. Now, I want you to notice how Mongolia is landlocked and also how big China and Russia are. We enter the north gate of Shanghai one foggy day with all the traffic, but we stay in a lovely hotel in Shanghai. And what I was fascinated by was the escalator that I could actually every morning get up and cross the highway through the escalator and go join the Chinese for Tai Chi. I don't know if you've ever tried Tai Chi, but to me, it's harder than it looks. They make it look so easy and so rhythmic. And of course, our first meal was Chinese noodles. How perfect. They were delicious We also got to see how they were made. It seemed like a very hot job, but it was very, very good. In China, we were treated to many, many delicious, wonderful, healthy foods. And it was often served on a lazy Susan. So if you ate with your chopsticks, you limit your intake. And of course, we visited their tea shops and tried all the different kinds of teas. They actually would have a golden Buddha that they poured the water over to make sure it was the right temperature to brew us the perfect cup of tea. And of course, we visited their fine art museum with the furniture, the coins, the beetle, the clothing, the calligraphy, the wonderful pottery that they had. And of course, we also visited many of their temples. And this one is one of the largest and most authentic, magnificent Buddhist temple of the Sун dynasty, and had many pavilions and fountains and arching bridges. And fortunately, there was a lovely young lady praying inside that we could join. And not only did we visit the temple, but we visited the Heavenly King Hall with many, many golden Buddhas. And if you notice, their arms are in different positions, which tell a different story each time. And this is the legendary 1,000-year-old tree that the Buddha sat under to gain all his wisdom. And once we left Shanghai, we went to Xi'an, and we're going to be being able to see one of the most astounding archaeological discoveries. And as we approach the entrance to the terracotta warriors, we see a lot of the Chinese people participating, visiting their heritage. And of course, they like to keep the sun off their beautiful skin. Wherever I travel in the world, I find the young people, the smiles are very engaging. They always want their pictures taken, and they want to practice their English. I have to introduce you to this emperor of China, who at the age of 13 in 247 BC took over as the emperor. And by 2021, when he was 22, he had made quite a difference. He had unified a collection of warring kingdoms during his rule. He standardized measurement, coins, weights, and interlocked the states with canals and roads, and he was credited for taking the first step in the version of the Great Wall. Now, this is what we're looking at. We are looking at this astounding archaeological dig, the most important one in the 20th century, the huge tomb site of Qin Emperor, containing an army of life-size terracotta infantry, cavalry, horses, and grateful archers. This particular pit is more than half an acre, and there's over 1,000 figures. We can thank this farmer who was drilling in his fields for water in the March of 1974. And all of a sudden he discovered and unearthed a beautifully sculpted head. One by one, the soldiers emerged, each handcrafted till there was over 1,000 of them. And I want you to notice the figures vary in height and uniform hairstyle in accordance to their rank, but they're all life size. You can see their hands, depending on their job. Are they, riding a chariot? And rows after rows of them, some missing heads and pieces. And then, of course, I want you to realize that these pits are 23 feet deep, 800 feet long, and 206 feet wide. To give you a comparison, a football field is only 300 by 160. So, this is practically 3 times. And of course, putting these figures together is very painstaking because they find all these pieces, they have to mark them, they have to label, and they have to put them together. And as they found them, they have revealed dancers, musicians, acrobats, who are in, acting and performing in addition to all the military. And remember, these are life size. And the Chinese have excavated the first 3 and have not gone any further till they finish some of them. And here again, you can see the archers in the front, and that it's very, very big. Now, we kept being treated to some interesting, unique experiences. We visited this little village that had this drum society, which is very unique. None of the music is written down. They have had to memorize this music, and they play these very unique instruments. Just listen. It's interesting, though I couldn't speak their language, they couldn't speak mine. I caught the eye of the young woman in the front row, and I can still remember making a connection. And of course, we are in busy Beijing with flowers and busy roads, the ring road around the capital, and it's the capital of the People's Republic of China, one of the most populous cities in the world. And of course, it's their political center. Although it's the political center, we saw along the streets, children playing, people were waiting to go to work, mothers taking their children to school, visiting the local market. How would you like some meat, not refrigerated? Or wouldn't you like to buy some of these fresh, colorful vegetables from this vendor? We had another unique experience. We went down these residential lanes and alleys. We had been invited to the home of the Cricket Man, and this is the Cricket Man. And he was very well known. Books had been written about him and his crickets because he entered them in contests and kept winning them. And he knew how to judge a cricket on its speed and its care. So he was very proud of this one. This one had won thousands of dollars. I think this cricket probably is worth more than I am. A very unique experience. Now, you can't go to China and Beijing without traveling to the Green Mountains and walk on the famous Great Wall of China with its spectacular views. When my husband and I were there, we had it to ourselves, this particular trip. There were just many, many people, but it was nice to see the local people doing it. And we were walking the more difficult part, but we are happy to share it. And of course, you can see even young people. And these are these countless towers that during the old times, they would send out warning signals of smoke. And of course, the Great Wall is a wonder of the world. It's just like a giant dragon. The winds up and down across deserts, grasslands, mountains, and plateaus, 5,500 feet from east to west. And I tried to do one in black and white to give you an idea of how ancient it is. Now, I don't know if you remember the Beijing Olympics in 2008. This was the aquarium where they swam. Of course, you remember the great swimmer Phelps. And then we visited the beautiful Temple of Heaven. It is more than 3 stories high, one of the biggest, and you can notice the beautiful red that represents the dignity of the imperial court of China. And by scale, you can see how tiny we are. And of course, you can't, must go to the Forbidden City from the Ming Dynasty. And this is a facility with 9,999 rooms, 980 buildings. It just seems to go on forever and ever. And of course, many visit, even the young people on field trips studying. And it seems like pink is universally loved by little girls around the world. And as we leave, we are about to, go back to our train. And I have to say that every 3 or 4 days, we would pack a little bag, leave the train, and it would go to a siding, and we'd go off to a hotel and take all these little field trips and excursions, from the hotel, then return to the train. And of course, the train had to change engineers every once in a while because an engineer could not go out of his province. But the most interesting part was when we were at the border, we had to change to a special Tsar's gold private train because the rail tracks between China and Mongolia differ in size, requiring the change of trains at this juncture. The Russian Soviet built their rail grades slightly wider than the standard size used in Europe and China in order to keep Napoleon and later on World War II soldiers from marching in and through Russia and such. So that, and while we were on the beautiful life on the Tsar's gold train was lovely. You can see our little cabin you can see our bed, and they'd be put up so we could sit there and enjoy the view. There were several dining rooms. We usually ate in the blue, and this beautiful young woman is my traveling companion, Sue. And I believe she's watching today. She and I went to Carleton, and so we traveled together. And I have to tell you, we were so well fed, and as you traveled through China and Mongolia and Siberia and finally to Russia, it's interesting how the quality of meals were equal across, but the size of them, by the time we got to Russia, we're getting 3 sausages instead of 1. We never lacked for food. And of course, we'd go through, the little towns as we, adventured and such. This is an interesting story. Just before I left, a dear friend of mine had just adopted 2 brothers from Russia. And she noticed on my itinerary they were going to stop in the town where the young university professor who had helped her in this, to accomplish this deed, if I could take a gift to her. So I was happy to. And of course, when I got on the train, I explained this to the steward, and she said, well, that's fine. I'll wake you up at 2 because they were going to be stopping for 20 minutes. Well, it so happened that the young woman never arrived. But later on, when I got to St. Petersburg, I was able to, mail that package to her. But I kept this in because I thought this would make a great picture for a mystery, a copy of a book for a mystery. And of course, along the line, you'll see the local people selling their vendors, the local people ready to get on the train. And now we're going to headed into Mongolia, located in Central and Eastern Asia, is a landlocked country, as I mentioned. And of course, the landscape is made of lots of steppes, which are lowlands, rugged terrain, extreme temperature. It can be hot in the summer and cold in the winter. And of course, it's known as the land of blue sky. And you'll see that as we go through. And of course, the Gurs are very favorite places to live out in the desert. And of these young men, horse are very important in this culture because I think the boys and the children are on horses before they can walk, because of the large spaces and the traveling, and they're thinking of the Mongol Empire. And then, of course, you can see that there are both gurs and houses as you get closer to town. They use the gurs in the summer and the houses in the winter when it's colder. And of course, we arrived in the capital. And though I have to remind you, Mongolia has the lowest human population density of any country in the world. And in the eastern steppes has the lowest density of Mongolia. And this is the capital. And it's the cultural, industrial, and financial heart of the country. And it's the center of Mongolia's road network, and is connected by rail to both the Trans-Siberian Rail in Russia and Chinese Railroad. And it's been settled since 1700. And of course, Ulaanbaatar can offer you snacks as you arrive. And it's a city of contrasts. There's the Buddha on the hill. There's Genghis Khan, the young gentleman who made the empire possible. As his statues, the government buildings, and then the modern buildings and the continued building. And of course, I have to introduce you to Genghis Khan, the founder and first great Khan of Mongol Empire, which became the largest contiguous empire in history after his death. And he came to power by uniting many of the nomadic tribes of Northeast Asia. He unified Mongolia and extended his empire across Asia to the Adriatic. And to give you an idea of the size, notice that this is all the way from Japan here, and then we go all the way across up to Mediterranean, Adriatic, and this is the Silk Road. So that was quite an empire. And now when you're in Ulaanbaatar, you can buy furs and leather, whatever you need. And one of the interesting winter palaces was this particular one, which had become a museum. And it was one of the few things that escaped 1930s destruction of the Russian Stalinist purge. And it was thankfully that they were able to save this. And of course, it's now a museum, and inside it has the artifacts of the Buddha and the typical gur, and it's inside. We were so pleased to be able to enjoy the music and the arts of the local people. They would give us concerts with their wearing their traditional wear or robes and playing their music. And this is a horse head fiddle that was very, very plentiful. And they also had throat singing. Listen. I would like you to listen to this just a little more. You can see the horse head. And to me, singing in the back of your throat would be very difficult, but each of those sounds means something. And of course, here's some lovely ladies in their traditional dress, the dancers, the musicians with their instruments, and listen to them. And they were well known for their archery, their wrestling, and acrobatics. Now, if that isn't hard to do, try this. Can you see? And sort of unwind her. We were treated to many adventures in eating, and this reminded me of a restaurant called Stir Fry in our locale, and of where you picked your vegetables and your meat, and then they cooked it right there, and it was fresh. So notice our meal being cooked. Luckily, I wasn't in the kitchen. And here again, this was one of the oldest and largest monasteries with the many prayer reels that people would come by and, handle and say their prayers. And there were 600 monks here. And here are some of the monks that are studying. And of course, I thought this was sort of an oxymoron, military man and the monk with his rosary, but I think he's also tapping on his cell phone. But it's also a park where the local families can come, and the Sunday afternoon, look at those cute little people. Can you sit that way? And of course, this little young man with his ponytail is just so intent on feeding those pigeons. Now, wild and untamed, Mongolia is a deeply spiritual land of nomadic cultures and dreamy landscapes and mountains, as well as crystalline lakes and great swatches of grassy plains and ancient desert. Even today, Mongolia evokes time when Genghis Khan and his warrior horsemen thunder across the steppes to establish the largest land empire in the world has ever known. And so here is Lake Baikal. Here are the Gurs and the mountains. And as I said, Mongolian horses were instrumental in the 13th century conquest of the Mongol Empire and continue to play a cherished role in Mongolian culture. And as I said, I think they, ride a horse before they walk. This young woman is milking a mare for mare's milk. And of course, they have camels in the desert. And here is a Gur, and we are invited to visit. The Mongolian family invites us to visit. We were just delighted. And we were treated to cheese curds and fermented goat's milk. I enjoyed the cheese curd, but not sure about the goat's milk. And I want you to look inside, how efficient and beautiful. And of course, it's very times it might be dreary outside, but look at how the beautiful colors for the cupboards, the tables, the drawers and the beds. And as I said, they would demonstrate their sports like archery and wrestling and of course, acrobatics. And here again, children are special all over the world. Look at these beautiful ones, the grandma and the child. And here they are, as I said, they ride before they walk, and they have, lots of races and contests between them. And here again, you can see why it's called the land of the blue sky. To me, it reminded me of our beautiful parks where, the sky is endless and the clouds. Now we are going to be treated to a ride on the Baikal line built in 1902 to 1905. The railroad was the original line used by the Trans-Siberian before the present day route was completed. And it was considered one of the most complicated of all systems in the world because the route hugs the rocky shore around the lake with 33 tunnels in 1,300 miles. And here you can see, excuse me, you can see the beautiful lake that we're going around, and you can see some of the scenes we see across as we go. And you can see we were actually on it and went there, and we actually swam in Lake Baikal. And we were invited to visit Adaka, which is a seasonal or a second home for the Russians because they had very little opportunity to buy land and build a house where they wanted. So these were their getaways, and it was beautiful because they had their gardens and their greenhouses. And here we are, we're invited to dinner, we meet the children. And as I was walking to dinner, I met this young woman. I thought, oh, she'd be fun to have a cup of tea with. And of course, in Irkutsk, is Paris of Siberia. And Irkutsk is the capital of Eastern Siberia, which is beautiful. It's buildings and also has the most extreme winters. It could be months of 13 below and such. So, but on the other side in the spring, the flowers are out and families are in the malls with their children playing. And I was fascinated by the women's shoes. So how about those? And of course, I'm so sorry, there's the flower girl, the balloon man, the statue of the first bike. And just like Costco used to, samples. And being the penguin lady, a friend said, you have to take a picture of the penguin. And at night, we would see the city in all its lights. And then breakfast, we'd come down to being greeted by this lovely young lady. And then we retreated to venture outside the city to the fascinating outdoor museum of a wooden, authentic Russian architecture of native houses. And they were buildings like the community building, the mosque, the schoolroom, and such. I was also taught and reminded of some history that I wasn't too familiar with about the Decembrists and interesting stories that were told. And of course, these officers of the Imperial Russian Army advocated for democracy after they'd fought in 1825. The government was not very happy with them, so they banished them to Siberia. I don't know if your parents ever said, if you don't behave, we'll send you to Siberia. But it's interesting, these couples had been visiting in Europe and were very sophisticated, and they were aware of fine arts, and they decided, and music, and the wives decided that they would take their furniture and their education with them, with their men. So they took that with them when they went to Siberia. And to give us a feel of what it was like, we were treated to a concert and a private champagne reception. The lights were turned off, only candles. And if you closed your eyes while he sang and he played, you felt you could take you back in history. And then we stopped at the largest city of Siberia, and this has more than 1.5 million people, and it never existed before the Trans-Siberian Railway was built. It was growth largely due to Quebec. And these young ladies are greeting us in their native dress and, of course, their native food. And they invite us to dance. And though it's way out in Siberia, they built a beautiful opera house, and the acoustics were wonderful. The insides were beautiful, and it seats almost 2,000. And also, as we approach another city, we come to Ekaterinburg, which was founded in 1721, named after Catherine I. And it's known as the place where the last Tsar, Nicholas II, and his family were imprisoned and executed by the Bolsheviks in 1918. And here you can see a home, the mosque, and the memorial to the soldiers. Here's Nicholas II. And here's his family, lovely three daughters and his son and his beautiful wife. And they ran into trouble, and they were executed, as I say, in July. And it was they were kidnapped and put in this house and then executed. And there was such an uproar that they took the house down, and they decided to canonize his family. And they built this beautiful Roman Orthodox church, the Church of the Blood. Now, we could go inside, but we couldn't take any pictures inside because it's very respectful. And of course, this is the museum that goes with it. And as we're back on the train, we see the scenes of the water tower, the shutters, the little quaint little houses. And then we near the train station, Kazan train station. Look at that building. It's quite exotic. And of course, Kazan is the capital of the Republic of Tartazan. And it is known for this beautiful mosque. And this beautiful mosque was raised by Ivan the Terrible, conquering army in 1552. And it's the largest in Russia, and it can seat 6,000. And of course, it was rebuilt so that other people can enjoy it. And it's not only beautiful on the outside, but beautiful inside. And of course, it can take 6,000 people. And of course, people visit it all the time. Lots of wedding traditions. I don't know if you've ever seen all those locks on bridges. I've seen them in more than one country. And of course, the old and the new in Moscow, the Annunciation Cathedral, the train station, the homes, and as it say, it's along the river. And it's interesting, since 1991, central Moscow has been transformed. Beautiful pre-revolutionary buildings that had been allowed to fall into disrepair under the Soviet system are now being lovingly restored to their former gallery like this. And of course, just seeing the people, the bird lady, the street painter, a child, the ladies relaxing. And then of course, we have the famous convent in Moscow. And this is the Moscow convent that was founded in the 16th century and still intact and built as a fortress on the curve of the Moskva River. It sheltered many ladies from the Russian royal families that were forced to take the veil. And there's a beautiful chapel there with all the icons and chandeliers, also a cemetery that has newspaper men, famous women, cosmonaut, and of course scenes, as far as I can see. But now we must embark on a discovery of the Red Square, the Kremlin. Red Square remains, as it has for centuries, the heart and soul of Russia. Few places in the world bear the weight of history to the extent that Moscow's Central Square does. From the 16th century St. Basil Cathedral, one of the most famous pieces of architecture in the world, to this very modern pyramid of Lenin's tomb. Red Square is rich in symbols of Russia's turbulent and intriguing past and such. And it overlooks the rivers, and it reminds us of the modern day Russia, of its medieval past in the center of Moscow and Russian politics. And within its walls, there are palaces, cathedrals, government buildings, the Armory Museum, and Lenin's mausoleum. And of course, this is the famous St. Basil Cathedral built to celebrate Ivan the Terrible's capture of Kazan. It was built between 1555 and 1561, and it was designed in the shape of a bonfire rising into the sky. And it was originally all white, but now today its domes are patterned and colorful. And you can see it no matter where you are with its vivid colors. It's now a museum. And as I say, here's the entrance. There is the museum, and here's Lenin's tomb. And of course, it's as beautiful at night as it was during the day. And I don't know if you're familiar with the gum store in the Red Square. It is a very elegant store with jewelry, furs, fashions galore. And then of course, it's fun to see Moscow at night and all its various cathedrals. And did you realize they had a famous my escalator? And so we are, riding the escalator down to the subway. And it is, it's our guide was telling us, you can see her there, get on and off, it's all automatic. You can't, take your time. And of course, it's a show place of socialist art statues, frescoes, mosaics, marble, gilded, and bronze walls and ceilings. And so it was, along with the Armory Museum with its Russian artifacts. Then I really appreciated visiting the Russian Space Museum. Do you remember Laika, the young dog that was up in space for them? And we met Alexander, a cosmonaut, who spent 6 months at the Mir Peace World Station in 1997. And this was operated in low Earth orbit by Soviet Union then Russia from 1986 to 2001. And interesting, when we were speaking to him, he was talking about how there were both Russian and Americans, and they sort of developed their own language back and forth so they could understand each other. And at first he was just really disappointed in the Americans because they spent time exercising, and he thought they were wasting time and they should be busy working. But then he realized that that was very important to avoid muscle atrophy. And he also told about the experience where the cargo ship came to bring supplies and take out the waste coming in too fast, and how quickly an astronaut has to make a decision to not have a disaster. And of course, you can see the crew, and here he is. And it's interesting, afterward, he invited us to ask questions. And my question was, after 6 months in orbit, no gravity, did that affect his health? And he said, definitely it did. Now, at the time we saw him, he was no longer a cosmonaut. He was more in the education area of it. But before we say goodbye to Moscow, we can see their old buildings and remember all the many, many, many high rises of gray and dreary. And now on our way to beautiful St. Petersburg with its 18th century buildings. Can you imagine train stations? And of course, it is the Venice of the North with its many canals. It also has the port with the Rostov columns near the financial district. And this cathedral was beautiful, blue being my favorite. I really loved it. And it's now being used for concerts and ballets. Now, St. Isaac's Cathedral is the main church and the largest cathedral built between 1818 and 1858. Took 40 years to complete. And 180 years later, the gilded dome of St. Isaac still dominates the skyline of St. Petersburg. No matter where you are, you can see it. And of course, the cathedral's facade is decorated with sculptures and 48 massive red granite columns made of single pieces of granite. And the dome is, these are some of the statues. The dome is 220 pounds of gold, and it can seat 14 standing. Well, you've probably all heard about the Hermitage, also known as the Winter Palace, built in 1754 to 62 as the principal home of the Tsars. Was lavishly rebuilt in 1839 after being destroyed by fire. It was originally a very small gallery begun by Catherine the Great with a purchase of 225 paintings for Berlin. Today, the largest museum collection in the world is here, including works of Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, Rembrandt, Rubens, Picasso. And of course, when we were there in the early 1990s, it was a very dreary place. It was dark and dingy, and it wasn't being taken care of. And now it's amazingly organized, and with over 3 million works of art in the collection. And if you were to visit all 300 galleries, you'd cover a total of 15 and a half miles. And just look at what it looks like inside. The entrance, the staircase, inviting you to explore the beautiful gold work and the blue marble, the parquet floors, and the gold on the ceilings, the treasures of hangings and clocks and clothing. And this is the Red Room. That was the library. And then we have Madonna, the sculpture. And then this is another one of their amazing churches that they have built. Look at the details. And within the walls and ceilings inside the church are completely covered in intricately detailed mosaics. The main pictures being biblical scenes, but with a very fine patterned borders setting off each picture. So you can see how large they are. The altar, And then we cross the river and visit the first structure and the oldest landmark in St. Petersburg, the fortress of Peter and Paul. And within the fortress, there is the beautiful church with its many chandeliers, its imperial crypts, gold icons, and halls. Now we're going to take a hydrofoil off to visit Peterhof to explore the estate of Peter the Great and Catherine the Great. And it is just on the Gulf of Finland, 19 miles out of St. Petersburg. And of course, here's the gentleman we're talking about. Peter the Great is credited with dragging Russia out of the medieval times to such an extent that by his death in 1725, Russia was considered a leading Eastern European state. He centralized government, modernized the army and the navy. And of course, this is his wife, Catherine, who was the most renowned and longest ruling female leader of Russia. And she was known for encouraging health, education, even attempted to free the slaves, but that didn't work. She was ahead of her time. And here is their beautiful home off the Bay of Finland. And it is coastal resident of the Russian Empire, which is famous the world over. It has become a symbol of the age of Peter the Great, the former imperial residence, surrounded with extensive parks, gardens. It's, rival of Versailles, completed with an array of gilded statues, magnificent palaces, and of course, the Grand Cascade. And now we're looking back to the Bay of Finland, and you can see all the statues and the goldware. And the building is 665 feet long, and it has 30 rooms filled with parquet floors, lavish apartments, and you can see the music room, the ballroom, the stairway, and many, many beautiful gardens that are so well kept. And of course, there's many, many fountains, and they're all gravity fed. And of course, they're the surprise, tricky fountains with which the local children really enjoy.
For the founded, and eventually they went to the city. The army was ready for her. Everybody was ready for her. But the thing was that she made a very wise thing. Remember, I mentioned that shortly before his return, her husband Philip III replaced the traditional Russian uniform, military uniform, with the Prussian one, which everybody thought was a great abuse. And on the way to the city, Catherine borrowed the old Russian army uniform.
Doesn't that look like fun? And of course, our guides were appropriately dressed in the formal wear and the beauty of the place. And as I've said before, travel for me is more than the destination. It is a new way of looking at people and places. Thank you so much for always being such a good audience. And I think Julie feels that we could have answers and questions if you like. And if anybody does, I'd be happy to answer them. See
awesome. Sorry, what'd you say, June?
No, I said, if anybody has any questions, I'll try to answer them. And if I can't, I'll find the answer.
That was awesome, June. Thank you so much. So right now we do have some questions from our audience, and I want to encourage people, if you have a question, go ahead and throw it in the Q&A area and we will get to it. So June, our first question here says, you indicated that not all the terracotta warriors in China have been excavated. How large is this archaeological site, and how much more is there to be excavated?
That's a big one. When I first went with my husband in the early 90s, it didn't even have a cover. Now it's under a roof and being very protected because they've begun to realize the value of what they have in this. And as I last knew, there are 3 pits, and the extent of it, I am not quite sure. But, you know, they keep working on it and recognizing that they have to preserve this, so they've covered it. And as I say, when you think it was to help the Emperor Qin get to his next life, that was quite a preparation.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I learned about this in an archaeology class, so it was super cool to see your pictures of it. Our next question says, is the railway only designed for tours now with periodic overnight stops, or is it also used as a traditional rail line for goods and people?
As I understand it, it's for both. We were assigned a certain car that was ours for the complete trip. So if we got off and went to the hotel, our several cars would be off on an area, and then we get back on the same train. So there is, you know, it's for tourists, but also for use for the locals.
Okay, great. Were the engines powered with coal or diesel? Do you know?
Ooh, that's a good question. You know, I better not say because I'm not sure. I don't remember coal being used, so I assume it might be diesel.
Perfect. Was there much remaining damage from the World War?
No, I didn't see that on this trip. And other trips I've seen it, but here on this particular, we did not.
And another question in our chat here, was the influence of Putin's administration felt when in Russia?
Excuse me?
Was the
Say that again.
influence, sorry, it might be cutting out a little. Was the influence of Putin's administration felt when in Russia?
You know, I'm going to have to think about that, because as tourists, we weren't, except maybe by the stories told by our guides and how their families had been impacted by it, like our Chinese guide, and how his family, his dad had been taken off to war, so they were impacted. And our Russian guide, a young woman, you know, remembered growing up under the, you know, the system where she and 3 or 4 families were living in one room. So they told us about the impact on the past and such. But, you know, Putin in particular, no, but they would tell us about their past.
It seems like many cities include the suffix K-U-T-S-K, Kaputsk. Do you know if that root means something?
I'm sorry, I don't. My goodness, I feel badly. I've got a lot of questions to look up. The engines of the train and what that means and the influence. I'm falling down.
Well, June, you covered such a vast area and depth of knowledge that how could you know all of these little details? Some of our messages in the Q&A section say beautiful whirlwind tour and thank you for a fabulous presentation. Makes me want to take that same trip. So that's
Good.
for you. And
Right.
The last question that I have here, again, if anybody has any remaining questions, please feel free to put those in the Q&A section. This question says, did anybody have any illnesses during the trip?
You know, it's interesting. My roommate and my friend, she did get an upset stomach and have diarrhea. But it, you know, I don't know what it was from, but it was interesting. On the train, we had a doctor who came to take care of her for the week before we got off the train. And at the last day, he came with a bill for $7. So for a week's visit every day, $7. So, it was nothing that stopped her from doing everything. And, it's not like, you're afraid to go to India because of the health or the sanitation. That had nothing to do with it. It was just an interesting experience about their healthcare system.
Absolutely. $7 is pretty cheap. We have another question. Have you taken any other Rhodes Scholar trips, and ones that you can recommend?
Yes, I have. Let me think about this. Okay, I should have my list. Another company that I like to travel with, which I feel is you get a good value for your money, is overseas adventure travel called Oats. And so I did the Siberian Railroad for this one. And then I'm thinking most of my other trips have been with Oats, like going to the ancient kingdoms and Jordan, Iran, Saudi Arabia. I decide where I want to go, and then I look up a company that goes there and do my homework. But I would recommend Rhodes Scholar. I find that Oats takes a smaller group, whereas Rhodes Scholar has a bigger group, which worked okay on the train. And I think I can add one other experience. My friend Sue and I decided we would not have our shower in our cabin. So we had to shower at the end of the car. We had to sign up for it. So, there was, the different levels of travel. And we got to see some of our friends that we met who had the actual cabin with a shower. So, all kinds of experiences.
And someone named Bonnie Scott, who I think might be your child, says, was the canyon rafting trip with the Rhodes Scholar?
Yes, it was. Thank you, Bonnie, my daughter. That was one that I took my grandsons on a trip down the whitewater rafting on the Grand Canyon. And that was Rhodes Scholar. Yes. Thank you for the reminding me. She has that kind of memory.
Are Rhodes Scholar trips reasonably priced? Are they meant for people over 65 necessarily?
They're for seniors. I think it's 55. And I think they're reasonable, depending how long. I don't remember how much this one cost and such, but for a month and housing and so. And you know what? I have to add, I'm so happy to share my travels, because with this year not being able to travel, it's fun to relive your trips. So I recommend.
Yeah, I know from the feedback that I've gotten, people really appreciate the virtual travelogues for being able to get them out of their homes for an hour.
I would recommend traveling for anybody for an adventure. I think it expands your vistas, especially in our world today when there's so much unrest and misunderstanding. I think we have to learn to understand people around the world.
Absolutely. A few last questions here. How many days was the trip, and who ran the trip? What was the approximate cost?
Okay, it was for a month, and sorry, I should have looked it up, but I don't have the cost. And there again, I'm not sure Rhodes Scholar still has that trip. I would just, look on the website and look up Rhodes Scholar, because I continually get information. They're doing a lot of virtual trips and such too.
How many other people are usually on these trips?
With Rhodes Scholar, depending where it is, they might have 24. Now, the reason I like Oats, they usually try, it's probably 12 to 16. And, even that extra 5 or 6 makes a difference, because you want to interact with the people there, get to know them, be a part of a family. and be close enough to the guide to not miss anything, or that's how I feel.
Absolutely. Just a few more thank yous for a great presentation. And our last question that we'll end with here is, actually, we just got one more. Okay, sorry. people want to know your thoughts on things. Okay. What was the feel of the gum department store? Was it exorbitantly expensive, well stocked, available to any significant portion of the Moscow citizenry, etc.? Kind of.
Okay, it was extremely expensive. I couldn't believe how expensive the items were, and this was in 2011. So obviously, it's not accessible to most of the population. It's just, the rare few and such. Did that completely answer? There were certain parts of that question. Did I get them all?
I think that answers it.
Yeah.
Our last question here is from Becky Ruby, and she says, "Hi, June. Claire is watching with me and wants to know what your favorite part was."
I have to tell you all, Becky is one of my former students from 3rd grade and such. Now she's a mom living in Indiana with 2 beautiful children. Say hi to your mom too. So her daughter wants to know what was my favorite part. I think visiting with the astronaut to get the Russian perspective of space and how they learned to work together, the Americans and the Russians, and even created their own language. So to me, that was the closest I ever got to space.
That's so cool. Well, I'm just going to echo everybody else and say thank you so much for a great presentation today, June. And that will conclude.
Thank you, everybody. You're a most supportive audience, and I appreciate it. And thank you for inviting me. And we'll travel again sometime, probably.
We absolutely will. That will conclude our travelogue for today. Thank you so much to everybody for attending and for supporting the work of the Geographic Society of Chicago.